It was the kind of life that people dream of. You know, the kind where you wake up to the sound of birds singing, not car alarms, where the air smells like fresh hay and wildflowers, and the world feels like it belongs to you, and only you. For me, that life was a 40-acre ranch just outside of Austin, Texas. I had spent decades as a firefighter, saving lives, risking mine, day in and day out, and after all that time, I had earned my peace. My name is Joanna Carter, and I had finally found it, the kind of quiet that makes your soul smile. I woke up every morning to a sunrise over the hill that I had watched from my porch for the last year. No noise from the city, no distractions, just the sound of the wind in the trees and the hum of my horses grazing in the distance. I'd brew my coffee, sit on the porch, and breathe in the crisp, fresh air. My days were simple, tending to the horses, growing peaches in the orchard, and fixing things around the ranch. I didn't have neighbors to worry about, no HOA rules telling me how to live, and for the first time in my life, I felt like I was truly home. For that first year, life was everything I had dreamed of. There was no one to bother me, no noise, just peace. Then came the changes, the ones I never saw coming. A developer bought the land next to mine, and within months, houses began popping up like weeds in spring. Fancy houses, expensive houses, the kind of houses that come with pristine lawns and manicured gardens. And with them, the dreaded Homeowners Association, or HOA, named Pinebrook Meadows. At first, I didn't think anything of it. After all, my ranch wasn't even part of their new development. I had my fences, my boundary markers, and my freedom. But the HOA wasn't having it. They had other plans. The first letter arrived about a month after the construction began. It was official looking with the bold logo of Pinebrook Meadows stamped at the top. My first thought was, what in the world is this about? So I opened it and immediately burst out laughing. Your barn color does not match community standards. Please remove your tractor from visible sight lines, it said. I rolled my eyes. I wasn't even in their neighborhood, and yet here they were, sending me rules about my barn. I shrugged it off, throwing the letter in the trash. Who cared what they thought? They had no authority over me. But the letters kept coming. One after another they arrived, each one more ridiculous than the last. Your tractor is visible from the new homes. Your fence isn't the right shade of white. Please repaint your barn to match the aesthetic of the neighborhood. I could barely believe it. Was this a joke? Were they really trying to dictate how I lived? But still, I didn't take them seriously. They had no legal power over me. Then came the visits. I wasn't expecting that. One afternoon, as I was working in the barn, a man showed up at my gate. He wore a name tag that said, Tom Harris, Pinebrook Meadows HOA, and had a smile on his face that I instantly didn't trust. I'd seen that smile before, the kind that's too polite, too friendly, like they're trying to get something out of you. I gave him a nod, but didn't invite him in. I'm just here to let you know, he started, that your property is visible from our new homes, and the board believes it clashes with the community's aesthetic. We're working on creating a beautiful, unified environment, and we'd like you to help with that. I asked him if he wanted a nice helping of fresh horse manure to go with his opinion. That was the last time he came by. But just because he didn't return didn't mean the HOA had given up. I started seeing surveyors around my fence line. They planted flags, took pictures, and scribbled down notes. I watched them from my porch, growing more and more suspicious. One of them had the nerve to ask me what I thought about the boundary reevaluation. I gave him a one-word answer. Nothing. Then I called up the county clerk's office just to make sure everything was still legal. I'd checked my boundaries when I bought the property, but I wasn't about to let some HOA bully me into making changes for no reason. That's when I met an older man at the clerk's office. He leaned in across the counter, looked me straight in the eye, and said, "Son, if that HOA's got their eyes on you, they'll try everything. Watch out." I wasn't sure what he meant, but I wasn't going to ignore the warning. A week later, I took a quick trip to Houston to visit my mom. She had just gotten out of surgery, and I stayed a couple of days to help her recover. I didn't think anything would change in just 2 days, but when I got back, well, the HOA had made their move, and that's where the real trouble began. I drove up to my ranch on the third day, tired from the trip, thinking nothing of it. But as I turned onto my driveway, my heart sank. There it was, a massive steel fence running around my entire property, completely enclosing it. No warning, no explanation, just a solid wall of metal. And the only gate, the one I used to get in, was locked tight with a huge padlock. A sign on the gate read, "Private property. No trespassing." I stared at the fence in disbelief. This couldn't be happening. They had just fenced me out of my own land. I rattled the gate, hoping it would give, but it didn't budge. I was locked out. And not only that, but I found out the HOA had quietly bought the small plot of land that the gate was on, the one piece of land that was technically within their development boundary. They had used a loophole. Instead of touching my land, they had fenced around it. They owned the land with the gate, and now they controlled the only access to my property. But here's where it gets interesting. I wasn't about to scream or call a lawyer. No, I knew exactly what to do. I didn't just sit there and let them take control. Instead, I did something smart, something they didn't expect, and that was the moment everything changed. But you won't believe what I did next. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. There, in front of me, stood the massive steel fence that now encircled my entire ranch. It wasn't just a simple boundary fence, it was a full-blown wall, a locked gate at the only entrance to my property, with a "private property, no trespassing" sign hanging in the middle. My mind raced. How had they done this so quickly? The audacity, the nerve, the stupidity. In just 2 days, the HOA had somehow managed to lock me out of my own land. They had no right, no warning, no legal reason. They just decided to fence me in. And now, here I stood, staring at the gate, shaking my head in disbelief. I walked closer to the gate and rattled the padlock. It didn't budge. I pulled harder, desperate to get in, but it was useless. I was locked out of my own property. My stomach twisted in anger as I turned and surveyed the fence. It was high, solid, and unbreakable, stretching around my land like an impenetrable fortress. It felt like someone had put bars around my world, trapping me inside. This was more than just a boundary dispute. This was about control, about power, about the HOA flexing muscles they didn't even have over me. I marched to the small post by the gate, hoping for some kind of solution. There, tucked behind a few weeds, was a small metal sign that made my blood run cold. Pinebrook Meadows HOA property. My heart sank. The HOA had quietly purchased the tiny strip of land that lay in front of my gate. The only access to my ranch was now theirs. They had outsmarted me with a loophole. Instead of touching my land directly, they had fenced around it using the land they had bought on the edge of their development. They owned the land the gate was on, and now they controlled the only access to my property. I had to laugh at the irony. I had spent the last year building a life, enjoying my peace, only to come home to this. They had encroached on my land with no warning, no respect, and no understanding of what that gate meant. I stood there for a while, thinking about what my next move would be. The HOA expected me to just accept it, to roll over and let them take control of my life. But I wasn't that kind of person, not anymore. I didn't come this far just to let them bully me. I was going to fight back. But the question was, how? I couldn't just storm in and demand they tear the fence down. They had built it legally, using that tiny plot of land they now owned. What I needed was a plan. I needed to play their game, but smarter. And to do that, I needed a few things: information and the right connections. That's when I called Darla, my friend who worked in real estate. I had helped her rebuild her barn after it caught fire 2 years ago, and now it was time for her to return the favor. I needed her to find out who owned the small plot of land the HOA had bought, the one that held the key to my gate. Darla knew the real estate market like the back of her hand, so she was the perfect person to help me track this down. A few days later, she called me back with the news. "You won't believe this, Joanna," she said. "The land the HOA bought, it's connected to another small plot that runs along the main road, and the guy who sold it to them, he owns another piece of land right behind it." I didn't even let her finish. I knew exactly what I needed to do. I wired the money immediately. That plot of land, the one that had the only access to my ranch, was now mine. And even better, that plot also held the small maintenance shed where the HOA had stored the only key to my gate. I now had control of the key, the only access, and the land that could bring me back into my ranch. The game was on, and I had just made my first move. But I wasn't going to call a lawyer or shout at the HOA. No, I had something much smarter in mind. The next move had to be subtle, but it had to make a statement. I waited for the perfect moment, a weekend when the HOA was hosting their family picnic at their clubhouse. I figured that would be the best time to show up and make my presence known. I drove up to the small piece of land I had just purchased, parked my old truck at the edge of the property, and stepped out. I walked to the gate, pulled out a large, private property sign, and started hammering it into the ground. It felt good, empowering even. I wasn't just some rancher being pushed around by an HOA. I was taking my land back, and I was going to do it with a smile on my face. That's when I saw her, Tara Harris, the HOA official, storming toward me with her usual smirk. She had a folder in her hand, and I knew she wasn't coming over to compliment my sign. "What do you think you're doing?" she snapped. I looked at her calmly and said, "Just putting up a sign. On my land." She didn't take kindly to that. "You can't just do that," she said. "It's against the rules." I held up the deed to the land and showed her the property lines. "It's my land now. I own it. The land your gates built on and the land you thought was yours, I bought it fair and square." Tara's face fell. She stood there in stunned silence as I slipped the key to my gate into my pocket, giving her a wink. "Guess I'll be letting myself in whenever I want from now on," I said. And just like that, the tide had turned. I was no longer the one locked out. I held the key, and it was time for the HOA to realize that they had made the worst mistake of their lives. But what happened next? You won't believe it, because the HOA didn't take this loss lying down. No, they came at me harder than before, but I was ready for them. What they didn't know was that this was just the beginning of my plan, and I wasn't going to back down. I could practically hear the ticking of a clock in my head as I stood there, feeling the weight of the key in my pocket. Tara Harris, the smug HOA official, stood frozen, her face pale and expressionless. She couldn't believe it. I didn't even have to raise my voice or wave a lawyer's letter in her face. No, my move was smarter, quieter, and more effective. I now held the key to my gate, the only gate that stood between me and my ranch. But that was just one piece of the puzzle. I was on top of the world in that moment, feeling an overwhelming sense of control. The sound of Tara's stunned silence was almost like sweet music to my ears. She wasn't the only one who'd underestimated me. The HOA thought they could fence me out, thought they could dictate how I lived. But they didn't count on one thing. I wasn't going to fight fire with fire. I was going to fight fire with strategy. And I had already made my move. I didn't rush it. I waited for the weekend, the moment when the HOA would be too comfortable, too distracted with their family picnic. I knew they would expect me to shout, to cause a scene, but I had no interest in making a scene. No, I wanted to make a statement, and I had something far more powerful than noise. I had patience. I called Darla the next day. She was the one person I could rely on to dig into the real estate market without raising suspicion. I needed to know who owned that small sliver of land the HOA had used to lock me out. I didn't even care about the cost. I was going to buy it, legally, quietly, and with my own cash. Darla's voice crackled through the phone, a mix of surprise and excitement. "You're serious, right? You want to buy that strip of land they used to lock you in?" "Darla, I'm serious," I said. "Find out who owns it and get me the paperwork. We're going to flip this thing on them."
A few days later, Darla called me back with the news I'd been waiting for. The small strip of land, the one where the gate was situated, had just been sold by a man who owned another small piece of land right behind it. I didn't hesitate. I instructed Darla to secure the purchase. I didn't care about the details. I needed that land, and I needed it now. As I wired the money, I couldn't help but smile. The key to the gate wasn't the only thing I'd gained control of. I had the land that held the gate, and that meant I held the power. And believe me, that power was going to change everything. I could practically taste the sweet victory. I wasn't just standing on my property anymore. I was standing in the future. The game was on, and I was ready to make my next move. The weekend came quickly. The HOA's annual family picnic was scheduled for Saturday afternoon, and I knew this would be my moment. I had everything set up. I didn't just buy the land, I had a plan in place. I loaded up my old truck with a few tools and made my way to the land I had just purchased. The HOA's picnic was just starting, and I could hear the laughter and chatter in the distance as I pulled up to the gate. The smell of grilled food wafted through the air, but I wasn't there for that. I was there for something far more important. I stepped out of the truck, the key to the gate jingling in my pocket. I walked to the small corner of the property where the fence met the edge of the land I had just purchased. I had a single mission: to make my presence known. I pulled out a large, private property sign and drove the wooden stakes into the ground with precision. As I hammered the sign into place, I heard footsteps behind me. I turned slowly, and there she was, Tara Harris, her face flushed with anger, a folder clutched tightly in her hands. She marched toward me with purpose, but I stood firm. "What do you think you're doing?" she snapped, her voice rising. "You can't just put up a sign here. This is Pine Brook Meadows property." I didn't flinch. "Actually, Tara, this is my property now. You see, I bought the land behind your fancy little gate, and now I control access. The key to the gate? It's mine." I let the words sink in. Tara's face dropped. She blinked once, then twice, clearly caught off guard. "That's not possible," she sputtered. I smiled, just enough to show that I was in control now. "It is now." I pulled the key to the gate from my pocket and held it up in front of her. "I think I'll be letting myself into my ranch whenever I feel like it from now on." I turned and walked away, the weight of the key a constant reminder of how this game had just shifted. Tara didn't say anything. She didn't need to. The look on her face said everything. She had lost. But I wasn't done yet. No, I knew the HOA wouldn't just give up that easily. They were going to come at me with everything they had, and that's exactly what they did. The very next day, I noticed something strange. A convoy of SUVs and golf carts headed straight for my gate. I figured it was just the HOA board members coming to gawk at their shiny new fence. But I was wrong. This wasn't just about surveillance. This was an invasion. They had come to take what wasn't theirs. The vehicles didn't stop at the gate. They drove right through the newly paved road that led onto my property, right onto the land I now owned. The nerve! I couldn't let them do this. So I marched out of my house, my boots thudding on the wooden porch, and stepped into the growing chaos. They were trying to push their way onto my land, as if they had any claim to it. Tara, along with 2 other HOA members and a lawyer, stepped out of one of the SUVs. They didn't even acknowledge me at first, but I wasn't going to let them get away with it. "You need to leave. Now," I said, my voice calm but firm. Tara scoffed. "You're trespassing on HOA property," she snapped. I folded my arms across my chest. "Excuse me," I said, raising an eyebrow. "This is my land, and I'm not going anywhere." What followed was nothing short of a showdown. Tara and her team tried to argue that I was breaking some imaginary rule about community zoning, but I had something they didn't: the truth, the legal papers, and the key to my own gate. They could threaten me all they wanted, but I wasn't backing down. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. Tara Harris and her entourage had come onto my land, and I wasn't going to let them push me around any longer. Their SUVs rolled up the new road, a road they had no right to build on my land. But the worst part? They didn't even stop at the gate. They drove straight through as if they had every right to be there. Tara stepped out of her SUV, looking every bit the part of an HOA enforcer. She straightened her tie, adjusted her sunglasses, and flashed me a smug smile that made my blood boil. "I see you're still here," she said, walking toward me with that same arrogance that made my skin crawl. "You're trespassing on HOA property. You're in violation of our zoning policies." I folded my arms across my chest and stood firm. "No, Tara, I'm standing on my land, the land I legally own now, the only land that controls the gate. You're the one trespassing." Tara froze, her expression faltering for just a moment, but then she quickly regained her composure. "You can't just do this. You can't block our community's access," she snapped. "This land belongs to the Pinebrook Meadows HOA now. We're simply following the guidelines." I took a deep breath and stepped toward her, my boots crunching against the gravel of my property. "You've been trying to control my land for months now, but let's make one thing clear. This is my property, and the gate, it's mine now too." As I said those words, I felt a rush of satisfaction. I wasn't shouting, I wasn't getting angry, I was simply stating the truth. I reached into my pocket, pulled out the key to the gate, and held it up in front of her. I let the weight of the key hang in the air for a moment before slipping it back into my pocket with a smirk. "So you see, I bought the land under the gate, the land you thought you owned, the one that controls the only access to my ranch. So from now on, I'll be letting myself in and out whenever I want. No more sneaking around." Tara's face turned white as she realized what I had done. She stuttered. "This isn't over, Joanna. You can't just change the rules. We'll take you to court." I smiled, not in a cruel way, but with the calm assurance that only comes from knowing you have the upper hand. "You can try, but remember, I hold the key now. I control the access, and that changes everything." I turned my back on her and began walking back to my house, the sound of gravel crunching beneath my boots. I knew this wasn't over yet, but at least I had control now. They couldn't just come onto my land without permission. The game had changed, and I was no longer the one being backed into a corner. It was their turn to retreat. Just as I was about to step inside my house, I heard the sound of an engine roaring in the distance, another convoy. The HOA wasn't done yet. They hadn't given up, and this time I knew they would come at me harder than before. But what they didn't know is that I was ready for them. I watched from the window as their SUVs rolled up the new road, parking just inches from my front steps. Tara was back, this time with a lawyer from their legal team and a few more board members. I knew what they wanted. They wanted to intimidate me. They thought that because they were an HOA, they could walk all over me, but I wasn't having it. Not anymore. I stepped outside, my boots heavy on the porch as I approached them. The HOA officials were all gathered near the edge of my property, exchanging words with Tara. They didn't even notice me at first, too busy with their plans to take control. But when they finally saw me, standing firm, my arms crossed, they stopped dead in their tracks. "You're not welcome here," I said, my voice low but sharp. "You're trespassing on my land, and I suggest you leave." Tara's eyes narrowed as she approached me, her lawyer behind her. You're inside our perimeter now. We've already filed the paperwork. You're in violation of HOA zoning policies. We're not backing down, Joanna. I stepped closer, the tension rising between us. You can't just come onto my property and claim it as your own. This isn't about zoning or boundaries. This is about you trying to take control of what doesn't belong to you, and I'm not going to let that happen. Tara hesitated, and for a brief moment, I saw a flicker of doubt in her eyes. She wasn't used to being challenged like this. She wasn't used to someone standing their ground. But I wasn't backing down. Not now, not ever. "We'll see you in court, Joanna," she said, her voice tight with frustration. "We'll take this as far as it goes." I smiled, not in a cruel way, but with the calm assurance that only comes from knowing you have the upper hand. "You can try, but remember, I hold the key now. I control the access, and that changes everything."
With that, I turned my back on them, walking back to my porch, my boots echoing on the gravel as the sound of their voices faded behind me. I knew the battle was far from over, but I had just made my point. I wasn't the one being pushed around anymore. The days after my confrontation with Tara and the HOA were filled with uneasy silence, but I knew the calm wouldn't last. I had made it clear I wasn't going to back down, but they didn't seem ready to accept defeat. They hadn't given up yet. I could feel the storm brewing, and I knew it was only a matter of time before they'd try something even bolder. The question was, what would they do next? It came on a Wednesday morning. I was sipping my coffee on the porch, looking out over my land, when I saw a convoy of vehicles approaching. This wasn't the usual HOA crew. This time, there were construction trucks in the mix. My heart skipped a beat as I saw them roll up to the entrance of my ranch, the entrance that was now mine to control. I stood up slowly, my fingers tightening around my coffee cup. Something wasn't right. I stepped off the porch and walked toward the gate. Sure enough, there they were, a group of men in hard hats and reflective vests, setting up equipment as if they were preparing to break ground on something. I couldn't believe it. Were they really trying to do this again? I marched over to them, my boots crunching against the gravel. One of the workers looked up, startled to see me. "Hey," I called out, my voice firm, "what do you think you're doing here?" The worker stammered, clearly caught off guard. We're just following orders. We've got a permit to pave a new road here." My blood ran cold. They were trying to build a road right through my land, and worse, they had no right to do so. I glanced around, trying to gather my thoughts. There was no way I was going to let them bulldoze their way through my ranch. I wasn't just fighting for a fence anymore. This was war, and I had one more trick up my sleeve. I turned on my heel and marched back to the house. I grabbed my phone and dialed Travis, my lawyer cousin. "Travis," I said, my voice steady despite the rising anger inside me, "I need you here, now. They're trying to pave a road through my land. I need backup." Travis arrived an hour later, his truck kicking up dust as he pulled onto my property. He didn't waste any time. He walked straight to the construction site and flashed his badge, demanding to see the permits. The workers hesitated, then handed them the papers. He scanned them quickly, his expression hardening as he saw the lack of authorization for the project. The road was being built without proper permits, and that was a major violation of county law. "This is a joke," muttered Travis, shaking his head. "They've got nothing. This road is being built illegally, and I'm not going to let them get away with it." He called the county inspector right then and there, demanding that the construction be stopped immediately. Within minutes, the work had ceased. The workers scattered, looking like deer caught in headlights as they realized they'd been caught red-handed. But that wasn't the end of it. No, the HOA wasn't going to back down that easily. They still had one last card to play. The next day, I received an emergency court order from the HOA claiming they had a right to access my property for public safety reasons and demanding that I allow them entry to complete their road. They were using the same tactics they'd been using all along, trying to pressure me into submission, but I wasn't having it.
I knew they were trying to break me, but I also knew I had the power to fight back. I called Travis again. This time, I had a different plan. I wasn't going to let them get away with this. I'd had enough of their threats, their lies, and their attempts to control my life. It was time to expose them for who they really were. I contacted Allison Price, the reporter who had helped expose the HOA's dirty dealings before. She was a journalist known for taking down corrupt organizations, and she was eager to help. I sent her everything: the footage of the bulldozer, the fake permits, the construction violations. The evidence was clear, and it was time to show the world what the HOA had been up to. The next morning, Allison arrived with her camera crew. We walked the construction site, filming everything. She interviewed me, and I told her everything: how the HOA had fenced me in, tried to steal my land, and now they were trying to pave over my property without permission. The footage aired that night, and within hours, it had gone viral. The HOA's phone lines were flooded with angry calls, and their social media accounts were bombarded with negative comments. People all over the country were calling for justice. The HOA was no longer untouchable. They were exposed. But the HOA didn't take kindly to this. That night, as I sat on my porch, sipping a cold drink and watching the sun dip below the horizon, I saw headlights approaching. I squinted into the darkness, recognizing the vehicles immediately. The HOA wasn't done. They were coming for me again. This time, they had hired a team of security guards. They parked near the entrance to my ranch, blocking the road. They weren't here for a friendly visit. They were here to intimidate. They had their sights on me, but I wasn't about to back down. Not now, not ever. I called Travis once more. "Get down here now. They've escalated. They're trying to scare me." Travis showed up minutes later with Sheriff Daniels right behind him. The sheriff was an old buddy of mine, and when he saw the security guard standing in front of my ranch, he knew exactly what needed to happen. He walked up to the group of men, his badge gleaming in the moonlight. "This is private property," he said, his voice calm but firm, "and you don't have permission to be here." The guards hesitated for a moment before realizing they were outmatched. They packed up and left with their tails between their legs. But as they retreated, I knew this wasn't over. The HOA was desperate. They had tried everything, and now they were fighting for their survival. But they had underestimated me. And that, my friends, would be their downfall. The next day, I drove into town to get some supplies and clear my head. I needed a break from the madness. I stopped by the local diner, grabbing a burger and some sweet tea. When I saw him, Sheriff Daniels, he slid into the booth across from me, grinning. "You really ticked off some powerful people," he said, chuckling. "I've heard," I replied, taking a sip of my tea. "Man, it's all over town," he said. "The HOA came to the station this morning claiming you're barricading their members and starting your own sovereign ranch state. They're serious, Joanna." I couldn't help but laugh. If they think they're getting away with this, they've got another thing coming. The HOA thought they could break me. They thought they could intimidate me, scare me into submission, and take control of my land. But they didn't know who they were dealing with. They had underestimated me. They didn't realize that I wasn't just some rancher they could bully into silence. I had fought my whole life for what I believed in, and I wasn't going to let them take that away. After everything they had done, the road paving, the fake permits, the break-ins, and the fake foreclosure notices, I knew it was time to take the final step. They thought they could wear me down, but instead, they had ignited a fire inside me. I wasn't just going to defend my land, I was going to expose them for who they were: corrupt, power-hungry, and willing to destroy lives for their own gain. It all came down to the court hearing. I had everything I needed: The fake permits, the surveillance footage, the drone footage, the proof of their fraudulent actions. I had the truth on my side. I wasn't just going to fight this battle in court, I was going to bury them. The day of the hearing arrived, and I was ready. I stood there with my attorney, Travis, by my side. Tara Harris and her legal team were across the room, looking as smug as ever. They thought they had this in the bag, but they didn't know that everything they had done was about to come crashing down on them. The judge, a sharp woman named Judge Carol Ames, called us to order. I stood up, my heart pounding in my chest, but my resolve unshaken. I looked across the courtroom, meeting the eyes of the HOA board members who sat in their stiff suits and ties, trying to look confident. But I saw it, the uncertainty in their eyes. They knew this wasn't going to go their way. Travis began presenting our case. He showed the judge everything: the fake foreclosure documents, the illegal fence, the bulldozer incident, and the surveillance footage of the break-in. The evidence was clear. Tara and her team had no defense. They had broken the law, and they had no idea what they were up against. I wasn't just some rancher they could bully into silence. I was a fighter, and I had everything I needed to win. Then came the bombshell, the flash drive. Travis handed it to the court clerk, and as the judge opened it, the room fell silent. The flash drive contained internal communications from the HOA, outlining their plan to take my land using every trick in the book: harassment, coercion, and illegal tactics. The room was stunned. The truth was out, and there was no denying it. "Your Honor," Travis said, "the land under the HOA's headquarters belongs to my client, Joanna Carter. It was legally purchased and recorded 2 weeks ago." The look on Tara's face was priceless. She had no idea what hit her. She stood there, her mouth opening and closing, but no words came out. She was done.
The judge didn't hesitate. She leaned back in her chair, clicking her pen 3 times, then looked directly at Tara and her team. "What I've heard today," she said, her voice cold, "is an organized attempt to violate a citizen's rights. You have failed to meet your burden of proof. This case is dismissed." The room erupted into whispers, but I didn't hear any of it. I was too focused on the victory. The judge didn't just dismiss the case. She ordered the HOA to pay $500,000 in damages for their unlawful actions. Tara and her team stood there, frozen in shock as the decision sunk in. I had won. But the best part? The entire HOA board was escorted out of their office by county deputies, handcuffed. Their empire had crumbled in front of everyone. I stood there for a moment, just taking it all in. The judge had ruled in my favor. The evidence was irrefutable, and the HOA was no longer in control. But I wasn't done yet. There was one final step to complete my victory. That night, I stood in front of my house with Ranger by my side, looking out over my land. I had fought for this, and now it was mine again. I wasn't just some rancher getting bullied by a corrupt HOA. I was the one in control. And as the sun set behind me, I knew that this was just the beginning. I had one more move to make, and it would make sure they never forgot who they were messing with. The next morning, I drove up to the piece of land I had just bought, the small strip that ran behind their newly built road. I had a plan. It was time to show the HOA just who they were dealing with. And the best part? They didn't see it coming. I had spent the last week making phone calls, organizing everything, and lining up a construction crew. When the trucks arrived, the HOA board members had no idea what was coming. I wasn't just building a fence. I wasn't just building a wall. I was building a rodeo arena right in the middle of their development. The new road they thought would be their crown jewel, well, now it was going to lead straight into my arena. I couldn't wait for the look on their faces when they saw what I had built. By noon, the arena was taking shape, and Pinebrook Meadows residents were gathering around, jaws dropping as they watched the construction unfold. The sheriff was there, the locals were there, and the HOA had no idea what to do. It was happening. My surprise was coming to life, and it was everything I had imagined and more. By the time the arena was finished, the entire neighborhood was buzzing. People from all over the county came out to see what had happened. I wasn't just a rancher anymore. I was a force to be reckoned with. And the best part? The HOA never got to rebuild that gate. They couldn't. It was mine now, and so was the entire community.
The HOA was gone, their influence shattered. The board members had been exposed, arrested, and fined. The residents of Pinebrook Meadows had no choice but to live with the sound of country music, rodeo cheers, and laughter echoing from the arena every weekend. The freedom I had fought for was now here, and no one could take it away from me. I never received a letter or an apology from the new HOA president, but honestly, I didn't need one. I had already won. The best revenge isn't always loud. Sometimes it's quiet, smart, and built from the ground up. And now, the land that was once meant to trap me was the stage for everything I had worked for, my freedom, my community, and my victory. The best way to win isn't always through courts or screaming. Sometimes it's about building something so strong that they can't touch it. And in the end, the only gate that matters is the one you control. What's your HOA nightmare? Have you ever had to fight back? Share your story in the comments below. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and join us for more unbelievable stories of overcoming the odds.